Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Software Design Simplified, where we take the principles of software design and we explain them in nice, simple terms that anyone can understand. It's nice and practical. Today, we have a bit of a change of pace. In the last three episodes of Software Design Simplified, we have been looking at examples provided by John Cricket, and more specifically, a calculator example provided by John Cricket. Big thanks to him. I'm just going to share my screen now and show you John's website, codingchallenges.substack.com. If you do happen to be learning design right now, then this is an excellent place to learn. And we were, up until fairly recently, doing the calculator challenge on here. So a big thanks to John for putting all this work in, creating all these really excellent exercises that you can work through. But today we're going to have a bit of a change of pace. And instead, we're going to be refactoring some code. And we're going to be refactoring some real-life code that Clarielle, I believe, if I pronounced that correctly, hope I have. Clarielle is here and she has very kindly provided this code to us. And it was an old project that she had lying around, and she thought it'd be interesting for us to work through it. It's a service I offer. Anyone could submit me their messy code and I will clean it up for you. I'll record a video and I'll send you back how I did it and what I was thinking and ideas that you can take away and apply in your own code bases. So if you're interested on that, go to synapticmishap.co.uk/refactor, and I'll provide a link for that in the show notes and at the end. But for now, we're going to crack on with this refactoring. And so I just want to take a few minutes and summarize Clarielle's app, what it does, how it works, and what change we need. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about guidelines on refactoring, what's important, what is not. So without further ado, this is Clarielle's app. So hopefully everybody can see this screen. I'm just going to get that out of the way. And if we do bin run, I've kind of taken Clarielle's code and created a little wrapper around it. And you can see there's several options here. We're focusing on option number 2, which is list all music albums, and option number 8, which is add a music album. So if we hit 2 and hit return, you can see the app sends us back these 2 music albums that are being published with dates and IDs. And then it asks us to choose another option. So we're going to add a music album. So I'm going to hit 8 and return. And it is not on Spotify. What's the date of publication? Let's go with an absolute classic. Destruction by Guns N' Roses. 90s classic. It was published on sometime in the 90s, I'm sure. Original release date 2018. Let's just go with 2018. This is like a collector's edition. So 2018, 01, 01. Is it archived? No, it's not. What's the genre? Rock. And then we can list all albums, and you can see we've got a third one here. So this third one has just been created. And yeah, that's kind of the app. Is there anything you want to say, Clarielle, before we kind of get into it? Anything you want to mention about this?
No, it's fine.
What was that? Sorry, you're just on mute there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said it's fine.
Yeah.
I have nothing to say yet.
Cool. So one thing I thought we could do is establish a goal. Goal is really important when we're refactoring, because just saying, I'm going to clean this code up is a bit like saying, I'm going to weed the face of planet Earth. I'm just going to go around every single garden and every single road and every single hedge and every single shrub, and I'm just going to keep weeding, and I'm going to keep weeding. When all the weeds are gone, we'll be done. It's just an endless task. You can just be here forever. So what you need to do, it's really important, is really focus on a goal. What are we trying to achieve? And normally we're trying to change something code, right? Normally we refactor to make a change easier. So what we want to do is establish a change, figure out what change we want to make, figure out why it's difficult, and then refactor the code so it's easier to work with the code. So I've just decided, taken upon myself to make an executive decision, that there are the two main things I want to add here. So I think one major thing that's missing is there's no question asking us what is the name of the album. And so it'd be kind of nice if we had the name of the album. And then the other thing that I've noticed, which is a little bit of a defect, is if you list all music albums, you'll see that the IDs change. Now, IDs should be static. IDs uniquely represent an entity. And if the ID is swapping and swapping and changing all the time, then you can't uniquely identify that that music album, which isn't good for discoverability. And in a REST API, everything should have a unique static ID. And I can tell you why that is, but we'll cover that later. The point is this ID keeps changing. So there's one defect, and then also there is a little feature that we want. So what I suggest is we start out with trying to add a name and see how we get on with that. And so off we go. So let me pull up the whiteboard again. So I've covered what the change we needed is. Let's refactor before we change. I'll just give you a little kind of overview of the code. We've got this app class here. This is all written in Ruby, I should say. I'm very familiar with Ruby. If other people are not, then like it's fairly readable stuff. There's lots and lots of documentation on how Ruby works. So I won't go into the niceties of Ruby because we've only got 50 minutes left already. So we've got this app and it has a start. This start method. Everything kicks off in this main method here. It creates a new app with a whole load of arguments that I've added. And then it calls this start dot start. This actually should be called app. So app.start starts the app. It prints out that menu that you saw. You choose an option from the menu. So it goes to this options list method here. It puts the menu out. Puts is just a way of saying it prints it out. It takes an input in, so you press one of these numbers, it reads that number in, and it then makes a selection based on the number that you've entered. It goes to this list of methods here, and based on the number that you've entered, it chooses the method to run. So if you hit 10, it'll go to 10 minus 1, which is item number 9 in this array. And item number 9 is this one here, method quit app. It will call the method quit app and it will quit the app. So number 8 is add a music album. So this here is the method that is doing the heavy work. This is doing the heavy lifting for us and is adding a music album. And then in terms of listing a music album, that is, I think it's just called list music album, predictably enough. Yeah, So this is listing the music album. And what we have at the moment is some extremely messy tests that I've written. The goal is actually not to add a Spotify API. I would love to add Spotify API, but you can't search Spotify unless you have an album name. So it's almost like we get the ID fixed, we add the name, and then we could do some cool Spotify searching, then pull in all sorts of information. So that's the ultimate goal. But really what we want to do here is add name. So you might be wondering, how does it store all this information? It stores it in some JSON files here. So I should say that this isn't actually JSON. It looks a little bit like JSON, but this is another little tweak that we should make to the app at some point, probably not now, which is that it kind of does this funny thing where it serializes the Ruby hash almost as JSON, but then it kind of double escapes it. JSON looks like that without these slashes, you know? So this isn't JSON, but we're not going to worry about that too much for now. This is how it saves the albums. And then at the same time, it also saves genres. So it has this genres file that I added a rock genre and I added a music album. And so it's created this genre ID and linked the two up. Now, I've created 3 very messy tests, but they do cover the functionality of the app. So one of the first things we need to do is make sure the code works, which I've done for us. Then we need to make sure we've got some test coverage. 3 tests is not an amazing degree of test coverage, but I think it's good enough for what we're doing for this example. Normally, I would have 20, 30 tests around this method, but it just gives you an idea. And then we've got our clear goal, which is add a name to the album. We're going to commit often, we're going to move in very small steps. And then finally, we need to bear in mind what a good test looks like and how we create tests that are decent. And we're going to do it test-driven development. So we're going to create a test that is describing the behavior that we want, basically. So if we link out to this is Kent Beck's excellent website, where he runs through a very comprehensive list of what good tests should be and all these different trade-offs. So I'll leave you to read that in your own time, because we surely do not have time to go into that. Any questions in the chat or from anyone before we dive into doing this refactoring? Okay. So the first thing we want to do is try and add a new feature. So when I launch the app, it will show me options. This is just a test showing the options. What we really want to do is add a new option, which is asking somebody what is the name of the album. So currently, let's make sure the tests pass. And they do. So what is the name of the album? Immediately, we're going to get a failure because we're not asking the user that question. Okay, that's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to try and ask them the name of the album. So, how are we going to do that? There is a section in the Add Music album that asks on Spotify, ask for the published date, ask archived, and ask genre. So I'm just going to do something naive and see if it works. Album name equals ask for album name. Maria, I think you're off mute. You could just mute yourself, please. That'd be great. So we're going to. I'm just going to mute Maria. Okay. So we're going to run that, and it's going to blow up. It doesn't know what ask for album name is. So bit by bit, we're going to add this method, and then we're going to do some refactoring. Could do the refactoring before, or we could do it after. It's always a bit of a tricky thing to figure out. So we're going to find the ask on Spotify, and we're going to do something similar. So we write just enough code so that the test passes. Ask for album name, and we're going to say output.print. What is the album name? And now you can see I've made a silly mistake. The question should be, what is the name of the album? Instead, I put, what is the album name? So this is a very good example of how moving in small steps can prevent mistakes. It's a very small mistake, but it is important how we ask it. Okay, back screen. Okay, fair enough. So we're now going to, not committing yet, because we haven't actually done really very much. We've just asked them, what's the name of the album? Then immediately said, is it on Spotify? So that's not very useful. We want to now read back what they're saying. So we need to change this test here. Now, this is really difficult to understand, right? This is input equals string IO new 8y date y rock. But for now, I'm going to hack it in, and then we can refactor. So this is number 8. This is adding a musical album. This is the simulating the user typing 8. And this is simulating them typing Y, which is it on Spotify? So between these two, we are going to enter an album name. And I'm going to make it short. Let's go with pop. It's an album by U2 from the 90s, one of my favorite albums. It's the very first album I bought, actually. So now everything should completely blow up. And it doesn't, which is not a great sign. So what's happening here? I suspect what's happening is it's reading this in for Y, which is interesting. So let's undo that change. This means our tests are not catching, they're not specific enough. They're not actually catching, they're not actually specific enough because they're not reading back the album name. So if I now add another assertion here, this is a list of albums that we're reading back out. So assert equal, I'm just going to put any old thing here, something, list of albums, dot strip, dot split. I'm going to take the first album, I'm going to run it, and we're going to see what we get. Okay, so this is what it's currently spitting out. And what we want is, we want it to spit out the name of the album alongside this. But there is a problem here because this number keeps changing, right? So we need to make a test that's going to make sure that this number is not taken into account. So the test needs to be stable, so it always passes. So I'm going to do something fairly basic there and just put in hard code this string. Now, of course, it's going to fail. And the only difference here is the number. So there's a few different ways of approaching this problem, but we can probably use a regular expression. So if we do, I think we can do assert, and in Ruby, we can do something like match. I think it's the other way around, actually. We want to do this first thing matches this regular expression. So now that should still fail. Let's get rid of that. Yeah, it still fails. But if we change this for so we've changed that for any number can go here. And now it passes. What was the point of that, you ask? The point of that was we want to be able to test this output. And so I'm going to do the same thing here. Our list of albums. This is a list of genres. In fact, we don't really need it for genres, we just need it for albums. So let's keep focused on that. Okay. What we want is a failing test that's going to push us towards adding the name in. And in the process of adding the name, it's going to be difficult, and that's when we're going to do our refactoring. So I'm going to say album name, and then we're just going to do pop, and then a hyphen, and then an ID. And we're going to put pop here, because that's the input, and this is the output that we want. So it's now failing. The problem with this failure is it's not really telling us what we've actually got, which isn't very useful. It's just going, oh no, it doesn't match, which is just a bit rubbish, really. So what we can do is add another argument here to say does not match. I believe that will give us a string down here that we can now customize. So we're going to replace that for expected, and it's going to be long and horrible, I know. This thing, this is the first album name, to match, but did not. It's published on Y. So that's interesting, isn't it? It's not got the date there that it should have. And that's because we're reading sequentially, we're reading pop as Y, because everything's shifted along one because we're not reading the input. So this is an example of, a very basic example of how improving the failure message on a test allows you to reason about the system. I could make this expectation a lot better, but I'll just leave it there for now because we're very short on time. The one thing we need to do as soon as possible, I can see this is repeated, this is a real train wreck, so is this, but I'm just going to be disciplined and put all that to one side And the very first thing we need to do is make it work. Those are the 4 rules of simple design. We're going to make it work. And then we're going to improve the names. Then we're going to remove duplication, and we can go from there. So the simplest thing I can think is to say album name. We're now going to read the album name from the input. Input.get s.chomp. And don't know how that album name, I don't know where that album name is used. I have a suspicion. No. Don't know how it actually, oh yeah, okay. It just returns it. Ask for album name, then stores it in album name. So we don't need that little thing there. We can just return it and it will read whatever the user has inputted. So, interesting. So we get 3 failures now. Undefined method chomp for nil class. So what's happening here? It's asking for the genre, and because it's run out of input, it's getting nil. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inputs. And here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inputs. So they don't match. So we're just going to add pop there and a new line. And we're also going to add pop here. And you can already see there's duplication here in our tests. The fact that we're having to add pop there, add pop there, add pop there. And even worse, we're having to do it with all these horrible new lines everywhere and try and insert pop, and then, you know, there's a chance of us making a mistake like that, for example, which would be disastrous. So it's not great, but let's do that. Okay. So now we're back to our original failing test. So that's good. All the other ones have are back passing again. The problem here is we don't know what pattern this is supposed to match. It just says to match pattern, but did not. Yeah, what pattern though? So once again, let's improve this test message. So I'm just going to say album name pattern, and we're going to store this in a variable, this regular expression here. I know it's really difficult to read this code. I just want to make some progress. So I'm going to put the pattern here. Let's see if that's any clearer. Okay, that's a little bit clearer. This is printing out the regular expression that it should match, and it's showing us it should match album name pop, but the album name isn't there and it says music ID instead. So that's kind of useful. Okay, so next thing we want to do is get that working. So how are we going to do that? Well, we have asked for the name, haven't we? Add music album. We've asked for it here, but currently we're not doing anything with that album name. We're just storing it in this variable, and there's nothing using that variable. So it's just sitting there doing nothing. So this is going to be the bit where it's going to be actually quite difficult to change, I think. And we're going to see what we need to refactor as a result. So we're creating this new music album. This is a Ruby object. And it's in this file. In the initialize it takes on Spotify, published date and archived. So we need to change this. So it's going to take name. So I'm just going to be very, very naive about it. Put name in here. Put name in here. and we'll just see what happens. Oh, it really doesn't like that. So it's been initialized somewhere with the wrong number of variables. Hi, Dennis. So it's been initialized here with the wrong number of variables. And as you can see, so this is kind of interesting. We made one change here, and now a completely unrelated area of the app breaks. This is essentially coupling across the app. We should be able to make changes in one very isolated area, and then things should just work, ideally. And instead, we've made this one isolated change, and now something completely unrelated has broken. And even worse than that, it just gives us this weird error message that isn't really very, isn't really obvious. And it's not even obvious actually how to fix this. So I'm just going to say, imagine we have some data, and I'm going to take the album name, and I'm going to add it in here. We're just going to give it enough so that it has something for that argument. Okay, so now everything doesn't break in all these unrelated ways, but we still don't get our passing test. Okay, so we've passed it into music album. Music album has, let's just recap, it's pushed it into this name variable here. And we're not doing anything with this name right now. And then when the from JSON method is called, it pulls out an album name that doesn't exist at the moment. So how are we going to force that to follow this name all the way through? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to figure out which bit of the code is responsible for printing out this name here, this album name, expected 0 music ID, all of that stuff. So I'm just going to grok the code for music ID, and we can see it's here. So instead of music ID, we want it to be album name, and we want it to be pop, and then we want the ID. So we're going to say album name. And here's where it gets interesting. I'm just going to hard code it as pop right now to see if we can just get it passing as quickly as we can. So it's passing. But of course, as we all know, the moment we change that album name, if I change that to, I don't know, what's another one word album name? There's a Beck album with one, let's call it Jump. There is a Beck album with a single word name. I just can't remember what it is. If I change that to Jump now, oh, we're back to failing because we hard coded it as pop. So what we really want is whatever name that was, we want to stick it in here. So we want each music album to store the name, and then we want this, instead of being hard coded as pop, to be music album name.
Okay.
What questions do people have before I carry on? So hopefully you see what's happening now. We're getting the name, but the name doesn't exist. So now we just do what the code is asking us to do and give it a name. So I'll store that in this variable, and we'll do a reader on it, name. Oh, now it's blank. It's interesting. Why is it blank? I think I know why. Because when it persists this object, it's not storing the name, would be my guess. Yeah. So if we if we run I'm just going to delete the data here because it's old data. We run it and just test this out, test my theory out. Add a music album. What's the name? Jump. Is it on Spotify? Ah, interesting. The name is rock. So that's not correct, is it? Oh, sorry, that is correct. That's a genre. I beg your pardon. The name is nowhere in the music album at all. So basically, it's not storing the name. So when it tries to retrieve it, the name just isn't there. It can't do anything. So we're now having to pepper the code with all these little changes. Let's see if we can figure out how to make this name persist with everything else. I don't really know what this exactly is doing, but it's merging the attributes with on Spotify. And on Spotify is overridden here, and these published data and archived are already preset in the superclass. This is one reason why inheritance makes things very difficult to understand, because I don't really understand now what this superclass is doing. But I'm going to guess that we need to add in name is at name. And that will generate the JSON with name in it. And we'll see if the tests pass. They still don't pass. Interesting. That is very interesting. So let's just run through it again. Each of these music albums is being read from this music album store. Okay. And that has been written by the add music album method. So this album name here has been passed to the music album. Then we add that music albums to the list of music albums. Then we write the file. Interesting. I wonder if that write file is doing something strange. So for each of the objects, we call to JSON on it. So I'm just going to do a little bit of debugging here. Generally, if you do this level of debugging, it means your tests aren't comprehensive enough. So this is genres. This is genres. And so is that. Okay, let's just put out a JSON instead. So the name is pop. So the name is there. The name is jump for definite. So it is persisting it. The question is, why is it not reading it back? That's interesting, isn't it? List music album. Read file object. I wonder if that's doing something. So this JSON, let's put out this JSON, see if it's reading back things correctly. Again, name is there. So I honestly don't know why that is not working. So what we're going to do is we're going to transition to doing a little bit of refactoring, which after all was the point of this whole stream. So I don't want people to feel like they're being shortchanged here. So we're just going to stash this. Git stash. And we're going to say, okay, that was too difficult. So instead of trying to approach it head on like that, we're going to try and clean up the code before we add anything in. So in our app, where should we begin? So let's begin with the add music album method. So we ask on Spotify, we ask for published date, we ask for archived. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is obviously make sure it works. The second rule of simple design is names that express intent. So title add a music album. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. This is title of each option when executed. So I think what we need to do is make that a little bit more readable. Add a music album. Let's say prompt or print prompt. Now, obviously, that's going to fail everything. So instead of changing this and causing a massive ripple effect, I'm just going to delegate to it. So it was print prompt title, and we're going to go to title. So that's a little indirection to keep the tests running green. And I'm going to move that over there so it can call either. Then finally, I'm going to rename this title to be print prompt rather. Title, print prompt. And they're all back to green again. Okay, so we're going to commit that small change. Okay, what next? So I'm going to remove this handle user input because that name doesn't really help me. It's saying ask on Spotify, ask published date, ask archived, and ask genre. So ask if it's on Spotify, I guess we could say. But ultimately, I think this section of code here is essentially asking the user for the attributes and creating a new music album from those attributes. And then it's adding the genre to the music album, which I don't think is entirely clear. And then it's essentially saving the music album, and then it's outputting a message. So it's almost like printing prompt, creating from the prompt. In fact, you could argue that that print prompt is actually just part of this section. This is gather information from user. This is set the genre only when the user provided a genre. I think that's gathering it from the user again, isn't it? And then this is persisting the album, and this is writing it back out. So I'm just going to group them like that for now. I'm not going to go too much into extracting methods right now, because we do know that we want this new prompt here and want something to be injected into this music album. So let's look at the design of music album and see if we can figure out why this never worked. So we've got on Spotify, publish date, JSON. What we might do here actually is just write a little unit test for this thing here, which might be quite good. So this is music album test, RB. It's actually music, isn't it? And we're going to describe music. It accepts a name. So let's just write a test for the existing behavior of it right now. And then we can figure out how to change it. So it can serialize itself to JSON. We'll put Spotify, publish date, and archive false. But it's true, why not? And then we can say assert equal, well, first of all, we'll do album dot to JSON. And then we'll do JSON.parse, JSON. And then assert equal, just leave it as an empty hash for now. Last album. We'll wrap this in brackets. And we'll run the tests. And it's not actually running that test. No matter. We'll okay, uninitialized constant item. So it needs to require relative item. Already see we're not going to get this done before the time runs out. Uninitialized constant music, because it's music album. Okay, we need to require JSON. Okay, so we've got this. What's different? The ID is random again. So we're going to have to remove the ID, basically. We're going to have to slice out all the different publish, date, archived, genre ID on Spotify. Okay, so now we can get rid of the ID. And now it passes. Still don't understand why it doesn't run everything. It's really strange. Okay, So now we can tentatively add in our album, and I want to our album name. I want to keep all of the other tests passing. So I don't want to start breaking the contract with this. So we're going to make the name an optional argument in here. So we're going to allow it to have a name or not as we want, which is going to give us future flexibility. So it can be supplied with a name. And we'll say over here a named argument, which is just name, and we'll go with pop. What we should see is name is pop. Now, what I like to do is all of this stuff is kind of irrelevant. So we'll just go assert equal pop to be, and we're going to fetch that specific attribute from the past album. Fetch name. Okay. So we put pop in here and we're fetching back out. We expect this to fail. Unknown keyword name. So it's failing here. So we need to make it pass. So I'm going to do name. I'm going to default it to an empty string, which is important because that's going to mean it's optional. It doesn't have to be supplied. And now the key is not found when it does the JSON. So we're going to do name equals name. We're going to do to JSON. We're going to go name is at name. And then that passes. And then we want to test from JSON as well. So this way we're just narrowing it down the problem and we're adding it to music. So clearly the problem with us adding name is somewhere other than music. And I'll backtrack and find out where it was. And I'll send you all a little extra addendum of a video if you would like that. It can be passed from JSON. Strictly speaking, in theory, if this has all of these serialization and deserialization methods established correctly on it, then everything else should just work. And it doesn't, so there's clearly some kind of problem deeper in the code. So can be passed from JSON when we supply a name. And so we want to say music album from JSON. I'm going to supply it one of these hashes. Name is pop. Attributes. And it's got to be attributes.toJSON. So we want to convert this to JSON, build an album from it, and then assert equal album.name is pop. Undefined name for music album. Okay. So interestingly, this doesn't work. I think that's because, of course, we haven't passed in the name. So from the data, we want to pluck out the name and pass it into this argument here. That argument goes up here. That stores it in name. And then name is getting merged into the hash here. Let's see if that passes. Undefined method name. Okay, so this is the next problem now. Name is not a public attribute on album. So generally speaking, I like to keep those kind of attribute private. but let's make an exception for this test. We do actually need to read it out in other places. So, okay, so that works. Do all the other tests still pass? They do. So now we're going to commit. Feature allow optional name to be supplied to album. So this is obviously not actually reached the end, obviously, but as I say, I'll figure out why it wasn't adding this name. It seemed to be serializing it and deserializing it, and all of this seemed to work. But then when it actually came to print it back out, for some reason it didn't retrieve it. So we need to figure out why that is. And that's pretty much us. That's the end of the stream. Would anybody like to ask any questions? Thanks for sticking with me through that. I know it wasn't particularly smooth. Well, if nobody has any more questions, then I will see you all later. Clary, I'll follow up with you. I've got a few more videos for you on how I got to the point that I did with those extra tests. And as I say, I'll create some a couple of videos around why it didn't work, and because that really gets under my skin when anything doesn't work and I end one of these streams. I just want to know why now. So again, it's a sign of kind of code that's too complex and too nested, because we should have just added that name and everything just worked. Well, I appreciate everybody's time, and I will see you next week, hopefully. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Amazing session.
Thank you.